The Met Office has a red weather warning. This is the top of the tree.
Six million more households are able to use hose pipes again.
The water levels here have gone down visibly.
Our climate is changing, and we're all seeing the effects in the extreme weather events over the last decade. In the future, it's predicted that we'll experience these extreme events more frequently, and consequently, as a community, we'll need to be prepared to look after ourselves and each other. Analysis of average temperature change in Europe over time clearly indicates a rapid rise since the Industrial Revolution began around 150 years ago. To mitigate this warming, communities in Cheshire and elsewhere have been encouraged to reduce their carbon footprint, and the activities of some of those were outlined in a previous video, The Climate for Community Change. Increasingly, communities are being encouraged to become more resilient to support vulnerable individuals as part of a first-line help during emergencies. During widespread and extreme weather events, the support services become overwhelmed, and therefore communities can help by preparing resources ahead of potential events. Chris Samuel is the team manager of the Joint Cheshire Emergency Planning Team, who goes on to explain the importance of integrating all resources at every level towards planning community resilience for the future.
Following the 2007 floods in places like Hull, Gloucestershire and Sheffield, UK government quickly realised that we needed to make our communities more resilient to future emergencies, such as flooding and other types of major incident. And here at Cheshire West and Chester Council, ourselves and other responding partners are looking to increase community resilience moving forward over the coming months of years. That will involve us running a series of workshops where we'll be asking parish and town councils to consider implementing and preparing community resilience plans, where they can harness local resources and expertise to make themselves more resilient to future emergencies.
This important and vital preparation can range from help and support through volunteers who can provide door-to-door assistance to the identification of buildings as places of refuge, thus incorporating a response at the local level with the more well-established blue light services.
Hi Mrs Robinson, I've got your load for you.
Oh, that's very good of you.
Alright,
Thank you very much.
Alright then,
Thank
see
you.
you and on then.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
thank you. Bye-bye.
Community leaders and support services met in Warrington in early 2012 to discuss several relevant issues and to help kickstart the process leading to the adoption of a plan template and toolkit to help groups identify vulnerable people and places that are at risk from our changing climate, as well as the consequential damage we're seeing today.
For me, the primary purpose is to give you a bit more of an insight into some of the work around the climate change risk assessment that came out at the end of Jan, but importantly talk to you about where are the gaps, what further help and support might you need in terms of taking forward some of the climate change activity and action on the ground, whether it's in your local authority, whether it's in related businesses or in the local communities. So what does climate risk mean for the North West? There's a couple of things, I think, just to make it very real for people. So climate risk could mean increased flooding.
Well, our correspondent Hal Griffith is in Wrexham. The town has already seen some flooding and is expecting more rain. So are they pretty well prepared, or as well as they can be, Hal?
Well, here on the River Dee, there's been a warning in place already for much of the weekend.
Increased flooding is currently, in terms of North West, 200,000 businesses and properties. If we include surface water, we probably add another 100,000. So 1/3 people, well, properties in the North West, are affected by flooding.
In terms of making communities more resilient, if that's the term you want to use, it's all about partnerships. None of us can solve any of this by ourselves. Even as a big water company, we're still reliant on other people, other bodies, other stakeholders, right down to the individual person in their house to do their own little bit.
When we're thinking about the question of how to make communities more resilient, I think it's important to note that we really need to think of the vulnerability of communities as well as whether they're likely to be exposed or not to a particular hazard. So having a kind of wide-ranging idea of what it is that makes communities vulnerable is very important.
There are lots of groups that can help us, both within Lymm itself and also in the wider Warrington area, the fire and rescue and the other emergency services. But I think it's about how do we coordinate all that, and how do we make people in the community aware of the issues, and how do we get people talking to each other, so that when something does happen, there was a proper coordinated plan put into action, rather than lots of people rushing around in different directions.
I think in terms of community resilience, it's going to be really important that they have the information and the tools to be able to target the most vulnerable members of their community, which will mean that they will know who some of those people are if it's a small enough community, but they'll also need help from the statutory agencies.
So here today in Warrington, we brought together a whole range of partners to try and explain to them what the climate change risk assessment that government released in January means to the North West.
But it is truly cross-government programme, and I'm just going to talk through how can we work together to get a really strong local input into the forthcoming National Adaptation Programme. So I'm going to talk you through what the climate change risk assessment is saying, and there's copies of that on your table.
And the beauty of the partnership that we've got in the North West is that on the back of this risk assessment, there are certain measures we can put in place collectively to help address the risks, but also create some opportunities in terms of how we might respond to climate change. So in the room we have lots of local authorities, but we also have business and other parts of the public and private sector. And together, and it's only together, we will be able to address some of those risks and opportunities in the North West. And today is the start of that, but by no means the end.
An early meeting in Lymm identified geographical areas at risk, and a discussion took place to identify their existing resources as well as potential for future development.
They've started that process of providing information. I think the next stage is to help us identify who we ought to be in contact with in terms of providing help and support to people in the village when we do have a problem.
You know, it's getting this data and using it within a community, but not abusing the data and scaring people, but saying, right, let's drill down into sort of the map of Warrington and start to look at that information.
Yeah, I thought it was very useful to have the overviews of the impacts of climate change, the risk assessment at a sort of national level, and then at a North West level, and to have the perspective of organisations like the Environment Agency and United Utilities and the local authorities. So it provides, if you like, the framework by which we at a community level can start to build up our own plans.
Another village, Ashton Hayes, featured in the previous video, has also been developing its climate resilience plan over the last few months, not only through the parish council, but also with agencies such as the Snow Angels. This has involved a number of meetings to produce their plan to provide essential information about who to contact, resources within the village, and different responses to different weather events. To date, this includes community meetings to help with advice on heating, meals, gritting of pathways, and the establishment of informal group meetings within the community.
I think if we're going to have truly developed community resilience, the priorities need to come from the communities themselves. I think there's a danger that we tell every community what they should do, and that's not necessarily what they want to do.
If they're prepared to do that, that would be brilliant.
Being able to support communities to get through those challenges is really important. There are some fantastic examples of communities taking ownership of their own assets, and the more we can do to help that, the more sustainable things will be in the future.
Cathy Boyd and Jane Colville have been recruiting and training volunteers to help in the Snow Angel programme. Aimed mainly at the elderly and more vulnerable in the community, they can provide an immediate response to those who otherwise would be isolated and cut off from their basic needs. Even talking through the stress of their situation can be of paramount importance for boosting morale.
Now and in the future, one of the challenges for this particular sub-region is an ageing population. The number of people over 85 is going to increase dramatically by 2015, and along with all the climate change, both of those things happening more or less at the same time mean that communities are going to have an opportunity to help their most vulnerable members, but at the same time they're going to need some support in how to actually achieve that.
With local information gathering, communities are now actively engaged in planning for the future. With this knowledge, these groups provide invaluable and trusted community support during the initial effects of extreme weather conditions, while monitoring ongoing developments to update the various agencies involved. We're only just beginning to feel the effects of climate change. Whatever we do by way of mitigation now and in the future, some change will be inevitable due to the greenhouse gases that are already present in the atmosphere. These will lead to further warming and more energetic and therefore more destructive weather events. We need to be aware of the potential changes and be prepared at the community level for what these changes will bring.
Already saturated West Country has been deluged again overnight by rain. This has been the wettest April since records began.
The Environment Agency says there are more than 250 flood warnings and nearly 300 alerts across England and Wales.